Sacrificing your own interests on behalf of somebody you love is one of those time-honored solutions to many problems in life. After all, sacrificing yourself for your spouse shows them that you love and care for them, right? Like, the idea is that the more two people sacrifice for one another, the more ideal their marriage actually should be, right? Maybe not. So in this video, I want to give you 3 reasons that I believe sacrifice is a bad strategy for marriage. That's today on Relationshots. Hey, welcome to Relationshots. My name is Eric Wooten. If this is your first time hanging out with us, welcome to the place to get practical relationship advice that actually works in your relationship. Imagine that. Hey, if you've not already done so, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss upcoming videos. If you want a free guide to intimacy, you'll see a link in the description area below. If we can walk with you in any area of your relationship, in any stage of your relationship, whether you're dating, whether you're pre-married and engaged, moving towards marriage, whether you're married, you'll see all kinds of resources and avenues to strengthen your relationship in the description area below. So check those out, whether you're single, dating, pre-married, or a married couple. So let's talk about this idea of sacrifice, right? It would be hard for me to argue with anybody that it doesn't feel good when somebody sacrifices for you, right? When they make a sacrifice on your behalf, that shows that they care about you, that they love you, they want what's best for you, even at the expense of themselves, that they value you enough to be willing to sacrifice maybe something they like so that you can have what you like. All those are great things. We want those things, right? The opposite, somebody who will never sacrifice, never compromise, is always selfish, is not the kind of partner we're looking for anyway, right? So it would be hard to argue and say, well, this isn't a good thing. But I do believe that sacrifice as a strategy for your marriage is actually not always a good thing. And so in this video, I want to give you 3 reasons that I believe sacrifice is a bad strategy for marriage. Before I jump into those, let me remind you of a story that you may be familiar with. It's an older tale, fable called The Gift of the Magi, and in it, it's about sacrifice. And so the idea is there's this couple that doesn't have a whole lot of money. They both want to get each other a nice Christmas gift, and so in order to do that, they're going to make a sacrifice. And so the husband's prized possession was his watch. The wife's prized possession was her beautiful hair. So what the husband does is he sells his watch in order to get a comb for the wife's hair, while at the same time the wife sells her hair to get the husband a watch fob to go with his watch, his prized possession. So when they present the gifts, obviously you see the irony of the sad situation, which is 2 people who loved each other, willing to sacrifice for each other, and in the end, they both ended up with stuff that doesn't do either one of them any good. The idea with marriage is not necessarily that this will happen just like that for you, but I do believe there are 3 pitfalls to the idea of sacrifice being a great strategy for marriage. Number 1 is this: sacrifice is often done in private. What that means is we are usually making a personal sacrifice by ourselves without communicating to our spouse about it. That means that what we miss in the marriage is 2 people working together to come up with a mutually agreed upon solution to a problem, because it's just done in private. It also means often the spouse who is sacrificing is not being open and sharing their feelings on a situation, and instead they're just making a sacrifice so that their spouse can get what they want. So what happens is, because it's not shared, because it's not talked about, because it's done in private, sacrifice can actually lead to less openness in a marriage than if we actually shared how we were feeling about our side of the situation, or how something might impact us, and create more openness in the marriage. So one of the reasons is sacrifice actually leads to a little more privacy in marriage. A second reason is that sacrifice usually doesn't lead to long-term solutions. So when one person is making a sacrifice, they're usually only willing to do that sacrifice for a little while. They're not usually willing to do that as a habit for the long term. And so what happens is that something that was at one time voluntary is now expected to be the norm by the other person and now is demanded, so that it is no longer a voluntary sacrifice by the person. For example, you may have a situation where one spouse is willing to sacrifice their enjoyment in an area, let's just say sex. So they're willing to sacrifice their enjoyment sexually in an area on behalf of their spouse enjoying something sexually. And so they were willing to do that at one time, but what was one time voluntary, now the other spouse continually pressures or pesters them to continue to having sex in that way, which, remember, was not enjoyable for the other person. So at some point, that person is going to avoid engaging in sex because it is no longer enjoyable for them in the long term. And so what happens sometimes is it's not a good long-term solution, because what was voluntary becomes expected, and now there is frustration around those expectations, and we're making a sacrifice not because we wanted to, because now we're expected to. A third reason that sacrifice does not work as a great strategy in marriage is that usually sacrifice expects reciprocation, right? If I'm a sacrifice for you, then I believe at some point you probably should sacrifice for me back. And if you're not sacrificing for me back, then at some point I'm going to believe that you don't care about me or the relationship. Not only that, but some people will actually use sacrifice as a primary tool in order to get what they want. So it's not that they actually want to sacrifice, but they're wanting something reciprocated at some point. And so it may be, I know that you probably will not give me this thing that I want in my life over here. So instead of bargaining, talking about that, figuring out how we can get on the same page, I'm going to make a lesser sacrifice for you with the expectation that you will then have to reciprocate for me and give me the sacrifice that I wanted over here. So my motivation was not to give you what you wanted. My motivation was to get some leverage with you to really get what I wanted. And so sacrifice will oftentimes expect reciprocation in our life, which puts us in a bad place. So if sacrifice is not a good strategy, then what is a good strategy? Let me say it this way: joint sacrifice is the ideal for marriage, which means that both of us are making a sacrifice with a similar goal. So here's the difference between joint sacrifice and individual sacrifice. First of all, joint sacrifice is not private. It's out in the open because we're talking about it. Secondly, joint sacrifice has a defined, limited time to it because we're trying to accomplish a goal. And lastly, joint sacrifice is a mutually agreed upon sacrifice for a mutually valued goal at the end of the day, right? So it may be something as simple as we're going to cut back on some of our spending here. We're going to sacrifice some luxuries here for a time to save for a house. That's joint sacrifice. Or maybe we're going to sacrifice some stuff financially now so that one of us can get an education, which will then allow that person to do what they ultimately want to do, which will be a financial gain for the both of us somewhere down the road. Maybe we, in the short term, we both sacrifice moving away from family in order to take a job that will set us up for a future financial or vocational goal as well. The difference is joint sacrifice is agreed upon, where personal sacrifice is not talked about, may not be sustainable, and may actually be motivated by, I want some reciprocation back from you. So does that mean we never sacrifice individually in a marriage without talking about? Absolutely not. I think there are times where we make little sacrifices for one another, and that is how we show that we care and love one another. But I think personal sacrifice as a strategy where you continually give in and don't talk about it and just sacrifice all in the name of love does not actually further your relationship. It will rob you of some communication, and ultimately it can cause resentment and bitterness. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If that is your tendency to sacrifice, where you have seen that become difficult for you, or just what you thought about this in general, drop a comment below. If we can help you in any stage of your relationship, we've got dating classes, we've got a singles community now that you can be a part of if you need some people to walk with you through this thing called a dating process. We have some experiences coming up for both singles and married couples in September and October, retreats, 4-day retreats in Mexico. And then we've got our marriage membership. We'd love to get you connected with community and resources that will help your marriage grow and thrive. So if we can help you in any way, please let us know. And until next time, I'll see you right back here on Relation Shots.